All right, hello. Welcome to our panel discussion on one-to-one computing initiatives. My name is Sean Lancaster. I teach at Grand Valley State University in Educational Technology Integration, a master's program. We actually have the first online program at Grand Valley, so we're excited about that. Today we have a panel of individuals, not quite a motley crew, but a nice panel of stakeholders in one-to-one computing initiatives. But before I get to the panel, how many of you are in a one-to-one computing initiative district? So a fair number. How many of you are teachers and administrators? Other? So we have a healthy mix. Does that help you out, Paul? Yeah. So the panel that we've assembled today, let's start with Paul Mulder. You want to raise your hand, Paul? Paul is a technology director and in the Allendale Public Schools. He's going to discuss the financial aspects of one-to-one initiatives. What are the considerations that you have as far as maintenance and ongoing costs, training and support? Dan Voss, you want to raise your hand? Dan is a director of instruction, and he is going to look at teacher professional development and the challenges in providing appropriate and timely professional development to teachers. Tim Camps is a former technology director. He's now a consultant available for individuals thinking about starting a one-to-one district or those who have already started it. He's going to look at district and school policies related to students, teachers, and parents that are impacted by the adoption of one-to-one initiatives. And Sean McMaster is our teacher representative. He's at the middle school level, and he will talk about his experiences incorporating 21st century instruction and assessment into his classroom practices. And so how this panel came to be, and I forgot my colleague,
That's okay.
Andy Topper, is also at Grand Valley State University. And in 2008, Andy and I were approached by an area school district that was thinking of starting, or not thinking, they were going to start a one-to-one initiative in 2009. And so we started working with the district. Andy was doing a new professional development model with teachers, and I started as evaluating the effectiveness of the program and the overall impact of the program. As we started getting into interviewing various stakeholders, from the superintendent down to principals, vice principals, directors of technology, and teachers, and we also started hearing from our own students who were starting one-to-one initiatives or were in districts where they were thinking of starting initiatives. And if you remember in 2009, that's kind of when budgets started to really tank in the state of Michigan, and they haven't gotten a whole lot better. And so Andy and I wondered how schools could be considering going to a one-to-one initiative when budgets were so tight. And so we started looking around in western Michigan for districts that had a one-to-one initiative already and districts that were thinking of going to a one-to-one initiative. And we found 5 school districts at that time in 2009 in various stages. We found a private school, we found public schools, we found rural schools, suburban schools, a healthy mix. And we went in and interviewed the various stakeholders, and we had 4 basic questions that we set out to answer through the little study we did. 1, how are these districts funding their initiatives? 2, what was their rationale for adopting a one-to-one computing initiative? And people ranged from saying they wanted to increase test scores to increasing 21st century skills. And I suspect if we asked people in this room what 21st century skills were, we'd get a bunch of different answers. And so because of that, a third question we wanted to look at was how are districts measuring the impact of their one-to-one initiative? And so if you want to raise test scores, that can get very dicey. How do you know if the math teacher used the one-to-one computers for this specific lesson or that one when you look at your MAP scores or your MEP scores? And so, and if you're looking at the 21st century skills being improved on students, have you defined what those 21st century skills are so that you can measure them? And we also had a fourth question, and that was looking at the kinds of teacher professional development that schools were engaged in. The findings, on a broad picture, I didn't say what Dr. Topper is going to discuss, but he's going to synthesize what the other panelists talk about and tie it into the research and what we found in our study. But what we found was not anything earth-shattering, I would say. You need to have all the stakeholders buying in. If you have a weak link at the principal level, then potentially the program's not going to realize the success. If you're hoping to save money, for example, having digital textbooks, those aren't necessarily cheaper, although I'm encouraged by the new Apple textbook initiative where they're $14 or less for textbooks. But there are teachers in some of these school districts that are developing their own kind of online textbooks, so to speak. And that takes a lot of time. On the other hand, being a very good teacher takes a lot of time. And being a very good teacher means you don't have a lot of time. And so as we go through the panel today, they'll talk about their various areas, but we've also built in time at the end for you to ask questions and for us to have a discussion. And you can ask any of the panelists at that time. There will be a microphone that we can pass around so that you can ask your questions. I'm going to pass it over to Paul Mulder, who's the Director of Technology in the Allendale Public Schools, and he will take it from here. Would you like this, Paul?
No, that's all right. I can talk well enough. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, I'm going to just kind of move around a little bit up front here, because that pillar is like not being able to see about a third of you here. In Allendale, we're about a 2,500 student district right now. And I bring that up just so you kind of get a feeling for the size district and the size program that is. And we're running about 250 staff, teaching staff that is. So you kind of get an idea of the scope of our program. Now, after I sat in the opening keynote with Kevin Honeycutt and everybody enjoyed that, I thought, boy, and then I get to come here and I talk about funding and infrastructure. What a downer. So I'm going to try. In our case, our initial funding came from a bond. And that's one of the easiest ways to get into it. But there are some sustainability issues that we have to really grapple with and think of long term. If you can start out funding it from another source, such as general fund revenue or other revenues, well, then you've got that hurdle partially cleared. When we did ours, when we talk about a one-to-one initiative, one of the things that I found out very quickly was it wasn't just about the device. It's really about creating 21st century learning spaces. Because if I have the device but I can't project it, then I've lost part of it. And some of the research that I looked at was pretty clear that it was about the entire learning space. And so we spent about 50% of the money on devices. The other 50% went to projectors, smart boards, sound enhancement, a switcher scaler. And one of the big keys that we had was, let's just keep it simple. Keep it simple for the teacher. So you're not sitting there on the projector trying to change the resolution because you've got a different device attached to it. And then the other thing was, from an infrastructure standpoint, let's do this so that it's easy to support. And so all of our projectors, we hooked up to the network. My projectors email me when the bulb's going out, when the filter's plugged, and the projector's getting too hot. We get an email, and it's kind of fun to be able to contact the teacher and say, are you having problems with your projector right now? And they say, yeah, I am. The fan's running really loud and it's not doing anything. All right, well, we've got somebody on the way. Those types of things become key to being successful. Our school went with a full-size laptop. I had the purchase order sitting on my desk when netbooks were announced. So they started out, netbooks only had 1 gig of RAM, and that was going to be too little. And so we said, no, we're going to do a full laptop to start with, and we went forward with that. Now, the interesting thing was, on the REMC bid, our laptop was over $1,400 for 1 unit. When I asked for volume pricing from these vendors through the REMC program, once you get above the threshold of 1,000 units, their pencils got really sharp. And we ended up with $715 per unit with a 5-year warranty. So that's just something to keep in mind if you can buy in bulk as opposed to 2 or 3 or 500 at a time, your pricing is going to get better. Sustainability. When I looked at everything that we put in place, smart boards, projectors, and so on, and just took a guess on lifespan, we end up with a situation where we need to come up with about $400,000 per year in order to sustain the program long term. Now that's assuming that at 5 years your laptop's done. Right now we think we'll get 7 or 8 years out of those laptops, and so that reduces the cost. What's the life of a projector? Well, that remains to be seen. What's the life of a smart board? Well, what happens with video? Does it change dimensions again or whatever? So you end up with that. Now, we're fortunate that we vacated an old building and we sold the building. And the board said, let's take that money and set it aside for technology replacement. So we have almost $1 million sitting in an account right now that we can draw on to begin replacing devices. That helps us a lot. We also experienced a tremendous savings in copying and printing costs. As we became more digital, as we went with MACUL and assignments were submitted electronically, we ended up with about $60,000 a year saved. You can look at textbooks, but as Sean mentioned, you end up with some different struggles with that. The state cutting back funding, that was a huge hurt. We're not setting aside any extra money right now out of general fund because of that. Insurance and growth. What I did was with the bond dollars, I bought for growth. And I bought for those that kids would break. And so what I do is I submit to the insurance company for the broken one. The insurance company gives us a check that comes back in the general fund, which helps pay for the cost of insurance and some of the other costs of the program. Charging partially for student damage, we do that. I'll tell you, it's an administrative headache and takes a ton of time. Professional development. We've had 1 to 2 people for the last several years who have been helping with professional development. It has to be just in time as the teacher wants it. You also have the struggle of time for teachers to work at. And you can provide them with that professional development and that learning, but then how they're going to apply it in their particular discipline becomes a struggle. Support. We added 3 support positions. Now our program is 4th through 12th. And so in each one of those buildings I have a full-time tech with a help desk that a student can come, says, I've got a problem with this is what it's not doing, this is what it's doing that it shouldn't do, and we work to solve it quickly and get them back into the classroom. Same thing for teachers. So if a teacher's having a problem, hey, I stuck my laptop on the docking station and it's not communicating with a smart board and I've got a lesson starting in 5 minutes, tech runs down there, gets that taken care of and gets them up and going. Good tech support is key to being successful. Don't underestimate that either. Filtering from home. Okay, now you've sent a device home and the parents say, well, you gave this device to my child, what are you doing to protect my child? We are directing all of our laptops back through our filter so that it's filtered from home. And I know these guys from Helen Christian are doing that as well. In fact, I borrowed from them and they helped me with some of those pieces. That has been a key component for our community and has been very helpful. With the new anti-bullying law that Michigan passed, they've made it pretty clear that if you've given the device to the student, home issues are now your issues and you need to deal with some of that. Got a few other things, but my 6 to 8 minutes is running out here. I guess I would summarize just a couple of things. You want to make sure you overdo your wireless, because not only is it the number of devices I gave the students, but it's the number of devices they're coming in with, their phones, their iPods, and so on, and we've got hundreds of them on our wireless network. And so you've got to have the bandwidth for that, and you've got to be able to sustain those many connections. And that, if the wireless is a struggle, people give up really fast. So make sure you overdo that. Get a survey tool. We went into one of our new buildings, and wow, wireless just wasn't working very well. Turned out they had used a different kind of construction. They filled all the cores of the blocks. They called it bond beam construction. We didn't know that. I didn't think to ask, did you do something different? Wireless wasn't penetrating our walls. So we had to add an access point in every room, not because the access point was at fault, but because the construction of the building didn't allow for good penetration of the wireless. And invest in that infrastructure to keep things simple. For the teacher, so it's easy to use, and for support, so that you can support it quickly. Okay, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Great. I was going to stay right here, but is that okay if I just stay seated here?
Yep.
Can you all see me back there, or should I stand up so you can? Stay up. Fine. I'm director of instruction at Holland Christian Schools. We're a school, private school, west side of the state, near Lake Michigan. Come visit, it's a great place. Holland Michigan's fabulous. There are about 1,800 students. Of those students, we have about 1,200 that have laptops, one-to-one. And we are currently in the mode, and the laptops are MacBooks. We're in the mode of getting iPads ready for our K-4 students. And our 5th grade students have laptops as well, but they stay at school on a cart, but they're one-to-one. Professional development, I would say, is the most important thing that you can do in a one-to-one laptop environment. Now, you got to have everything Paul talked about has to work. That has to work. That is important. But if you want it to be successful, you've got to help the teachers. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. And I love what Paul said about the just in case versus just in time. Sorry, did I say that right? Just in case versus kind of just in time. And what I mean by that is a lot of professional development you kind of come to, you learn about it, but you don't implement it right away. You don't use it right away as a teacher, and then it kind of gets a little, disappears off the radar, and you don't use it. You need the just-in-time kind of training, which is the most intensive. And just tell a little bit about our story of where we came from. We partnered with our ISD. We're in Ottawa County, so we partnered with our Ottawa ISD, and they helped us do some, what I would call, just-in-case training, because that was kind of what we were doing at the time. We did large group trainings, kind of got everybody up to speed. We did some team kind of level stuff at grade levels. But then we found out that was getting us so far, and then we needed to step and get into more of a tech coaching model. And that has been a great model, but very intensive personnel-wide. We would meet with every teacher, 6 through 12, 4 times a year, intentionally. They could come and meet with us at any time, but we intentionally met with them, worked on goals, planned things. They planned stuff with us. We would come into their classroom and co-teach with them, that kind of stuff. Excellent model. If you can do it. It takes intensive personnel to do, but probably your best model to head towards. And we're doing more with blended stuff. I mean, we've got a lot of screencasts, websites, a lot of stuff going on for professional development with teachers. And any way you can creatively embed it into any time teachers are getting together is key. Anytime. We took every professional development day and we did professional development with technology on those days, and we said we need this amount of time. We just asked for it. We found if you ask the building principal or superintendent a month and a half ahead of time, they'll say, great, you can take all the time you need, because they're looking for things to do. The other key thing that I would say in professional development that we found with teachers is if you can celebrate with teachers in what they're doing, that's really important, as an important aspect of the professional development. So we'd have teachers sharing almost, it transitioned from us sharing to them sharing more and more as we went through the professional development, and them building each other up. That was an important aspect. And it has to be, overall, it has to be goal focused. When I say tech coaching, we set goals with them, and they worked on those goals through the year, and if they accomplished that goal, we'd add another goal. And it was very teacher-driven professional development. And I think that's key. Meet them where they're at and take them that next step of where they need to go. I'm going to leave it at that because I want to hear your questions more than me just droning on. So I'll pass it off to, I think we're going to Tim next.
Okay, great. So a lot of issues. You probably have a lot of policies already in your district. And if you're looking at one-to-one, that sort of either adds some new layers of policies that you have to think about, or maybe gets you to think about policies that you have in place already that may or may not make sense when you go to one-to-one, whether that's bring your own, whether that's you providing devices, whether it's a mixture of that. And so I'm just going to quickly run through some things that were kind of on our radar, and then we'll hopefully have time for questions. So the big one that we started with was sort of that acceptable use policy. Everybody had to have one. Ours started out more as a list of sort of do's and don'ts, and a lot heavy on the don't side of things. Don't mess with the network, don't hack, don't do this, don't do this. And we really tried to turn it around and make it a positive thing. And so what is it that you want kids to be able to do? What is it that you want to see them creating and developing, and build that into your policies that they're saying. So ours became more of an honor code in terms of what things we were looking for them to do rather than a list of things to not do. And then you've got some nuts and bolts issues. Paul talked a little bit about the damage, insurance, those kinds of things. How are you going to work out those types of policies? Are you going to self-insure? Are you going to contract with somebody to do that? What's the policies in terms of who takes care of, billing parents or billing the student? What are the consequences if they don't pay that they're supposed to pay? Do you have a set policy that's been gone over with that? You've got some privacy issues. If it's a student device that they're bringing that they own, but they're on your network, what sort of privacy things are you thinking about in terms of that? If it's a school-owned device, have you clearly stated to them it's a school-owned device? You may have some content on there, but your privacy rights are limited. We're allowed to, if we've got reason to believe that there's things going on that shouldn't be, we can intercept those kinds of things, or we can monitor that kind of stuff. That's all got to be clearly spelled out. Everybody's got to be aware of those kinds of things. In terms of your staff, what are your PD policies? Do you have things that are required? When we rolled this out, and for the first several years, we had very intensive training in the summertime before school started. We added a tech conference in August. How does that fit with your PD policies? How does that impact your contract for those of you dealing with contracts and number of days and what they're required to do and be at, those types of things. Filtering kinds of questions. Again, the on-site versus off-site. Are you going to do both? Are you going to give parents options? Are you going to give there's a whole layer of kinds of things that have to be communicated to parents so that they know what to expect. Do they have options? Do they not have options? And we kind of morphed over time trying to respond to the needs of our families. Social media kinds of things. Are those things that you're going to either block or allow or encourage? What are your policies on those kinds of things? How are you going to use them instructionally? If you're going to use them instructionally, how are you going to help staff with that? What are your policies for interaction between staff and students sort of outside of the day through other types of medium? Maybe beyond a Moodle or an Edmodo or those kinds of things. So be thinking about those types of policies. Then you've got what are the instructional or learning tools that you're going to use as a district or as a school? Are you going to kind of leave it wide open to your teachers and say, hey, pick whatever you want? Oh, you want to use Moodle? That's great. You want to use Edmodo? That's great. You want to use Blogger? That's great. You want to use Google Sites? That's great. Or are you saying, here are 4 or 5 things. We'd like everybody to kind of have a baseline of certain things that we want everybody to use, and then we're going to let you explore. We may introduce that, just-in-time kind of thing of new things that we're going to introduce to people, but you may not require that. You might encourage certain things. You might say you can pick these other tools, but we're not real well versed in those, so it's going to be more difficult for us to support it. But if you're willing to kind of go out on your own and do those things, then that's fine. You just have to clearly communicate that with your staff, so they can't walk in 10 minutes before class and say, hey, XYZ product's not working, and you don't know anything about XYZ product. So those kinds of things have to be clearly communicated. I think, so what are your policies in terms of parent training, mandatory, optional, what kinds of things? How are you including them in those things? Email access, if you get younger students, are they allowed to email only within your district? Can they email outside of your district? So that's just a quick run through of a number of things that you want to be thinking about, and hopefully it's good questions.
All right, well, I am teaching over at the middle school. And from a teacher's perspective, we were very fortunate. Our district was very intentional on providing us with training. We had some great sessions. In fact, the teachers got their laptops, I think, a full year, if I remember it correctly, before the students got theirs. So we were able to really take a look at what options and tools were available to us. And I'm not going to lie, from a teacher's perspective, when you get a laptop, all of our buildings had 2 and maybe 3 labs, and all of a sudden, every student 6 to 12 had laptops all day, every day. And then our 4th and 5th grade had classroom sets of laptops. So there's just a vast amount of technology available. And it felt like I was like going into Myers, and when you go into Myers, you don't buy every single item there. You go to the exact stuff that you need. And that's what I felt like when we got these laptops. There were so many websites and so many great programs. It was really a challenge to figure out what's going to work best for your specific curriculum. One of the things that one of our teachers noted right away was he was a little offended, actually, at first, because he was talking about weather patterns and climate change. And they were talking about winter weather and storms coming in. And he had referenced the blizzard of 1978, I believe. And kids started getting on their laptops and they were working. And he thought that they were instant messaging, and they weren't. They were looking for photos of this blizzard. And it just gives such a dynamic difference where they can instantly be responsible for their own learning. In addition to the teacher provided materials. Online testing, of course, Moodle. I'm not gonna lie, Moodle's awesome. It's a great thing, but it is a lot of front-end work. It is a lot of uploading, but the payoff is phenomenal. You can have, those of you who know Moodle pretty well, the time that you save in correcting and all this stuff is very, very nice. What's really nice is we stopped having students come up and saying, hey, can I get a copy of this? Hey, I lost this. We've been posting it to our Moodle site. Back to having so many options, one of the things we're kind of looking at now is common way of doing things. We've had a few parents say, hey, I can't find this on your website, can we get this? And we realize that this teacher might use Google Doc, this teacher might use Moodle Calendar, this teacher might use a Google Calendar. So we have several different ways of doing the same thing. So now one of the things we're talking about is coming up with a common way of this is how we're going to do this, and add your own stuff. But this is where a parent can go for this is where a student can go for this, and if we're all consistent, it really helps pare down that confusion for that. Let's see, what else do I got? I asked one of my other teachers what they think. One of the hesitations when we first started, there was a slight concern for our veteran teachers. There was a feeling that they might not be all about having a laptop and doing that. And I will tell you, the teachers who were 2 or 3 years out from retirement were the hardest working ones. They took a hold of it, and it was really awesome to see the stuff that they brought in. It was incredible. They worked very, very hard to integrate and to connect with this digital generation. Learning about the 21st century skills, the laptop program has been amazing. The students have been able to collaborate with each other with Google Docs. They've built databases. One that comes to mind, our 8th graders built a database on American history and where certain events took place, the latitude and longitude lines, and they made a very linear timeline with a spreadsheet, and then they converted that to Google Earth, and they pinpointed all these locations, found pictures on the internet, and all of a sudden we have a visual textbook and then a complete tour of American history. So that was really cool to see them take time to do that. Back to assessment just for a brief second. I have found that a lot of students do really well with online assessments, but there is a section of students who don't do as well. I had one student in particular, I gave him an online test and he scored like in the 30% range. And I said, something's not right, this is a smart kid. And printed off the same test, and it was on paper, and he took it and he scored like 92. So for him specifically, and for a percentage of kids, a small percentage, paper copies if you're going to give online assessments, offer a paper copy to those students who really struggle with online. So that's kind of our biggest advice and where we've gone. So that's pretty much from my perspective.
Okay. What I'll try to do is summarize some, I think, the key points that each panelist brought out and connect them back to the research that Sean and I did a couple years ago, and then we're going to open it up for questions because we do want to allow sufficient time for questions. First, starting with financial obligations. Obviously, as Paul talked about, there are so many things to consider when you're thinking about a one-to-one initiative. Obviously, I would say most people start by thinking about the stuff, the hardware. Let's talk about a device, Apple, IBM, tablet, PC, netbook, laptop, ultrabook. That's a really good conversation to have from a technology standpoint. But ultimately, as Paul indicated, you also have to think about the other things, the other costs of ownership, if you want to think about them. Infrastructure, networking, wireless, printers, additional devices. And then if you throw on top of that the idea of maintenance, insurance, replacement, okay? And then we haven't even talked about professional development as a cost, support, training and support. How do you sustain those things long term? As Paul talked about, there are ways to do that, but it's certainly a challenge. They sold the building. They were fortunate they had that money available. Other school districts are using Title I and Title II money. Some districts are asking community members for donations and support. So there are lots of ways that you can do that, but I think the bottom line is think about funding not only in terms of the initial purchase of the gadget or the device, but also in terms of all the other things you've heard people talk about here today, especially as we think about sustainability. In terms of some of the challenges of professional development, I think Dan did a great job of talking about their model, which has been very effective. They started out with the traditional model of, I think you call it just-in-case training,
Exactly.
which was really meant for a broad audience. You come and you sit down, you learn how to do something. But over time, they've learned that as teachers get past the technical knowledge they need to be successful incorporating technology into the classroom, they need to be thinking about how to use it pedagogically. And that typically is a much more challenging kind of PD because it's focused on the incorporation of technology for a particular purpose, assessment, instruction, etc. So the tech coach and mentor model is one that I think other districts have adopted as well. And I think it provides time and occasion for conversation about technology that is more about pedagogy and not so much about technical issues. He also talked about blended instruction, the idea of thinking about your teachers as adult learners who can learn in online environments, who can learn in face-to-face environments, because that's going to help them when they begin to think about teaching in those environments, because they will have the experience of a student environment. And obviously this idea of focusing teacher support and training on individual teachers' needs. That's, again, a shift away from the all people get the same training model, which is fairly predominant. Tim talked an awful lot about policies. He talked about a breadth of policies, everything from an honor code and AUP to privacy issues, to issues of filtering, parental control, parental options, teacher choice, email issues. So you can imagine, again, another set of considerations for anybody who's thinking about this, which are not about money, which are not about helping teachers incorporate it and make a difference, but are about all the other things that you have to do legally, ethically, that you're obligated to do to make sure that you've done the right thing with technology, because you're giving access to people in situations that it wasn't available before, and you're responsible for that. So the whole idea of thinking about policies broadly and what the implication is of moving to a one-to-one. And then Sean talked about the idea, the other Sean, not that Sean, Sean McMaster talked about some of the perspectives of teachers, the idea of this feeling that you show up one day and everybody has a computer. It's almost like deja vu for me, because I've been presenting at conferences for 10, 15 years, and I can remember it wasn't that long ago when I would look around a room like this and nobody would have a computing device. Nobody. Okay? But now, probably about a third or maybe more, half, three-quarters have their own device. So the idea is that represents a challenge, as Sean said. I can say something, but you can get online and you can pull up 10 things related to that. So it changes the situation for the authority in the classroom, who is typically the teacher, and many of them need to share that responsibility with students now. And that's a fundamental change in thinking about instruction and assessment. So some of the issues that you talked about in terms of concerns of teachers, the idea that digital natives are in the audience, that they have more expertise than you do with technology, the challenge that presents itself, the idea that students are learning online in different settings, and you're responsible for that. How do you learn to do that? How do you incorporate assessments that are not maybe traditional known answer kinds of assessments? Move towards more of the 21st century collaboration. Students as producers of knowledge as well as consumers of knowledge. So we've really got a broad spectrum of issues here that I think collectively cause a point of consideration, which is if you're seriously thinking about a one-to-one initiative, there are lots of things to pay attention to. And at that point, I'd go ahead and open it up to questions. And we've got a microphone, so what we're going to ask you to do is, Sean's probably going to be the MC, walk around, and if you have a question, we'll get it, and then you can address it to a panel member or the entire panel.
All right, does anybody have questions?
Right up here, Sean.
Oh, yeah.
Figures.
I'll work back. I saw you.
Don't do that.
As far as I can go.
So if the goal is to go to one-to-one, what's happened with the MEEP schools and all the schools? Have the kids improved?
Okay, so I'm going to rephrase that question.
Yeah.
I'm going to rephrase that question. What is the impact on student achievement of a one-to-one initiative? Is that fair to summarize? Okay, who would like to touch on that one?
I'll start with that, I guess. Don't expect that in the short term you're going to see a sudden change, an improvement in scores. That's going to happen more over time. What you'll see first is the advent of more 21st century skills being done. But then as you move further along and you see instruction changing for the better, that changing instruction will have an impact on the scores because there are some ways that you can use the technology to your advantage. One of the things that we've done after year 3 to 4 and so on is using the electronic assessments to determine groups of individual students who need some additional help. And then we target that help to them using the technology. And so we've got some websites that we're taking advantage of to do that. And we've got teachers working in teams where one teacher will take the kids that are struggling and another teacher takes the kids that are average and somebody else takes the high achieving. They're doing different things and the technology is enabling them to do that in a reasonable way. So whereas differentiated instruction was difficult before, it's become easier. Not easy yet, but easier.
I'm not sure all the achievement tests or MEEPs or whatever are measuring everything you're getting with a one-to-one laptop or one-to-one device environment. There's creativity, collaboration, there's all other aspects that those tests don't get at yet. And maybe someday they will, but at the moment you're not going to see like radical change. Some schools do. I would say that we at Holland Christian did not see, and that was not our intention from the get-go, to do the achievement scores.
When we got the questions about that, we would say, come walk around and look at our classrooms and see how instruction is different. Our scores are just as good as they were before, but the learning environment's completely different. And so in spite of the fact that we're not teaching to the test and teaching all these other things, the kids are still doing well on the test, but they've got all of these other skills now. They're so much better prepared for life.
Right.
Hi, just a question. Excuse me, a question about.
It doesn't. No,
it's just recording.
Just for the recording.
Oh, sorry. A question about the device, and I guess to Dan, I know you were in on an iPad discussion, but I know that we're rolling out. I teach upper elementary. We're rolling out maybe the pros and cons of laptop versus iPad or tablet device, and one seeing a lot more for, I guess, the creation side of you're not just consuming information, but you're also then producing information, and maybe the pros and cons that you guys have seen. It sounds like a lot of the initiatives were more laptop based than maybe tablet, but as technology is changing, a lot more of the one-to-one is becoming, we're assuming the tablet is the best, and maybe what you guys have found from pros and cons of both.
Yeah, we started our laptop one-to-one in 2005, so tablets were not really, I mean, they had tablet computers, but they were quite expensive. I would say at the stage we're at, we're constantly evaluating every year what's the device to get. And for our 6 through 12 that have used laptops, we feel like it would be a step back to go to an iPad at this point with those students. But for a school that doesn't have the technology, I think an iPad is a great step forward. Fantastic, because with our K4, I've been unbelievably impressed with how, when those go into the classroom, how those teachers just take off and find things, and it's not the games and the apps that they're doing. It's more they're actually doing a lot of creating, recording, media use, just right out of the box without a lot of help, and that's what's amazing with the iPad. So I am very excited about the iPad at the K4, and I can see that stretching further. But right now, I think the laptop still wins out for what we can do with it at those upper levels, and the software that's available, the programming, the stretching that further. So.
I was just at that turning point where we were going one-to-one, and
Sure.
instead of going with, we've always had, I'd say, ubiquitous kind of iPad computers that would pass around one-to-one in the classroom, but we are a one-to-one iPad school, and it's pretty amazing, to go through it. I wanted to say too that if I were to do it again, I wouldn't even need interactive whiteboards. So
Right.
I could see so many costs to save. Is that right? Cost saving? I can't even think. But my question, and it's not a real downer question, but I am having some difficulties with policy. With all of a sudden, we don't lock the devices down. It's a high school, so we have a little bit more flexibility. So these students are responsible to maintain their own files, purchase apps if they want to. Bringing the device in for the first time to a teacher where this device is all the time on the student, I'm having difficulties with some teachers who won't let the kids use the iPad because they're playing games. And I tried to tell them, well, what do you think they were doing before the iPad? Do you think they were really listening to you? It doesn't help a teacher to hear anything like that. And when you take away a device from a student and another teacher is dependent on it, those are some of the concerns that we're struggling with, and just curious, maybe if it's not enough, I might speak with someone who might help me manage that part.
You're in your first year, correct?
Yep. Got a lot of good information to offer if anybody wants to ask.
And just, I'll just butt in here. Two of the districts we looked at, where the students took the laptops home and then were filtered in through the school gave parents the option to have, for example, social media turned on in 2-hour blocks. And so the parent could say, when you get home from school, I want you to have to do homework. And so from 4 to 6, that stuff is all turned off. And then from 6 to 8, it's on, and then 8 to 10, it's off. Or they can have it on the whole time. And I remember a principal telling me that he was hearing from some parents who thought that was just a horrible policy to give them that option, because suddenly I don't want my child to be on Facebook, and Tommy's mom lets him be on the whole time, and so I'm turning into the bad guy. Can you turn it off for everybody? And the schools were having those issues to deal with as well. And so, yeah, those are a problem.
We're in the first year of a 3-year pilot with a one-to-one, where our goal is to literally be one-to-one throughout the district. This year it's the teachers that have the device, and that way they get to teach alongside the technology and envision how they're going to use it and incorporate the technology next year. I'm going to address this from a bring your own device standpoint, and we're well aware that our devices we're going to have multiple levels of devices throughout before we're done with our pilot and truly one-to-one. one of the questions that my teachers are coming up with is, well, we've all got cameras now in the classroom, and so they're much more under the spotlight than they ever were before. How have your teachers have you dealt with that at all, where now instead of having, the students in the classroom, I've got 200 cameras or 600 cameras literally watching everything that we do 24/7. So I ask you that, and to see kind of where you guys went with that from a policy standpoint.
When a camera came on a computer, that was the best thing that happened. I'll say it that way. Only in the creativity of what the kids can do with that device expands exponentially.
But part of that is that culture.
Yes,
you have to have that culture and that environment created, and that that happens with the principal. It happens with other people within that building and the staff. That you got to build that learning community so that there isn't this fear that somebody's going to be doing something wrong and somebody's going to record that and post it somewhere. We had some easier challenges because we're from a private district, so we could control things a little bit more. So maybe our experience isn't the norm in terms of things that you have to be exposed to. But there's a lot of that goes to culture, and you can have great culture in any type of school, charter, public, private, whatever. You can have lousy culture in any of those schools. So it's creating that learning culture and an environment where we're more peers. And if they sense they're engaged, if you can get kids engaged in the learning, you're going to have less issues with them trying to photograph somebody doing something in the hallways or in the stairwell or whatever.
And I guess, we're starting with a core group of teachers, and then as we're building capacity every year, so we've got a core group of teachers on board this year, and then next year there's another core group of teachers, and then the student group kind of that moves through and kind of see this build. I'm trying to avoid the gotcha moment where the student is not necessarily taking it into the bathroom, because we already deal with that on our cell phones. I'm sitting here in class, and I'm that gotcha moment for the teachers, and we're always under a spotlight. But I'm afraid of kind of what this looks like down the road, the YouTube video that's coming.
Well, I'm not sure that this is a end-all solution, but one of the things that we have on our laptops is a program called LanSchool, which is it's not a course management, it's a classroom management system where you can monitor what students are doing. And with that particular program, you can set up not only which applications, but which websites they are either allowed to use or that you would rather have blocked.
So it's in distribution.
Right. And there are student ways around that, but if the teacher is intentional on setting up their what they would like blocked, what they would not like blocked, we know what they want the students to do, and if a student gets around that, but that's on the student, and you've set up the behavior expectations. This is what we're doing, this is how we need to use this time, this is how we need to get this accomplished. If you have other stuff to do, wait till lunch, wait till you get home. If you want to run a different program, this is not the time to do that. So it is setting up that classroom environment, and then also making sure that you as the teacher take ownership of saying, going into that setting and saying, this is what we need, this is what we don't want. I remember the first time I realized that a couple of my students were on Pandora, so I went to mine, I blocked Pandora, and they were shocked. They couldn't figure it out. They were like, why can't I listen to music? And because you need to be working on this.
There's no remote access.
Okay, so there would be a difference between iPad and laptops.
It does depend a little bit on the platform.
Yeah.
But one of the things I might add is we're going through the start of our next tech plan cycle. And so I've been working with a group of teachers, amongst others, and our laptops did not have webcams, and they've said they want the next generation that we buy to have webcams. And where that came out of is looking at what are we going to expect the students to be doing within 3 years, because the tech plan's 3 years, but what are the end products that we expect students to be producing? And when the teachers said, well, we're going to expect them to be creating multimedia stuff and do this, this, and this, and I looked at them and said, well, frankly, that means there's going to have to be a webcam on that laptop. Is that something that you're prepared to accept and address? Yes, because once they saw what the student was going to be doing with it, that they would need, that helped break down some of those walls.
And the item Sean mentioned about the LanSchool classroom management, not going to, that's one of the bigger challenges of having to bring your own device, because not everybody's device will be able to handle that software, or it won't be installed. And
yeah, and actually it's for the gentleman from Allendale. I'm curious, bring your own device. When you went to purchasing the one-to-one, did you consider bring your own device, and why, if you considered it, did you throw that out?
Did we consider bring your own device? That was not really on the horizon at the time. We're talking about 3.5, 4 years ago, and the tools for virtual desktops and so on were not nearly as mature as they are today. And so that is something that we are thinking about looking toward the future on, because the students are bringing the devices anyway. And so how we can leverage those is something we're paying attention to now. But 3-4 years ago, to be able to deploy that at an enterprise level, the tools were not there to do it.
So you wouldn't rule that out now?
I wouldn't rule that out right now. The biggest thing that our tech committee came up with as we looked at that is the one thing we can't overcome is the screen size. If you're looking at cell phones, iPod touches, and so on, this iPad screen seems to be about the minimum to do the vast majority of things. I can get AutoCAD to run in a VDI session and hook my cell phone to it, but am I really going to sit there on a screen this size trying to run AutoCAD or do a lot of photo editing? Probably not. How am I going to present with this? There's some other infrastructure issues that start to come to play. Not to say that it's a wrong thing to go, but there's additional considerations to think about.
I have a question that I haven't really seen addressed in any of the presentations on one-to-one experiences related to servicing and maintenance. We have a small district with very large families. Some parents will have 5 to 8 kids in our school district, and we can already anticipate them not wanting the liability of all of those kids having those devices. So how do you deal with, if you've decided as a district this is the way we're going to distribute our curriculum, your textbooks are going to be on your iPad, etc., and a parent just simply says, no, I don't want my kid to have that because I don't want to have to pay for it if they break it. Have you encountered that? How do you deal with that?
Yes, we have encountered that. Very limited right now, but we have encountered that. Number one, we have to make it happen. And so, if I've got 3 families that really don't want to pay for it, but this is our expectation, as a public school, I'm required to provide it. And, there's kind of a moral and ethical thing that kind of comes into play there as well, as far as equity. The amount of breakage that we've experienced, the amount of damage has really been, percentage-wise, relatively minor. And we're dealing with a full-size laptop, 17-inch screen. What we're going to go to with the next round is a 14 to 15-inch screen, or if you look at a netbook with a 10-inch screen, you're not going to have as much breakage with that. So I would say, if you kind of back up and look big picture, that money issue of dealing with the breakage is not that huge of an issue. And I've got $1.4 million stuck into laptops. And, I'm dealing with breakage on an annual basis in the thousands of dollars. So not a huge issue when you look at the broad scope of it. Is it frustrating? Yes. Our poorest families seem to also not take care of it as well as some of our more well-to-do families in some cases. That's a struggle. But I also have to look at what I'm providing.
So you don't require any families to pay for insurance, or if they break it, they pay a cost to fix it?
We do not require the parents to pay for insurance. The school took out an insurance policy. You can get an inland marine rider on your insurance policy for very little additional money, which can be used to cover like a complete care from $1 an HP. We did a $500 deductible initially. That can help soften some of that blow. We do ask the parents and the student to pay for up to $100 of a first offense, depending on the cost of the repair, unless there is flagrant violation. I mean, I had one kid got mad, pounded the keyboard, took the laptop, threw it across the room. They paid the $500 deductible, but that's the exception. So, yeah.
Sean, we're already over our time.
No, we're not over.
Oh, 5 minutes.
All right. So so when we looked at those 5 districts, one of them had a $30 kind of insurance fee that they charge to parents. And we had a superintendent we talked to just recently in one of the other districts who said that they started a technology club at the high school level, and he's gotten it down to the point where the biggest expense they have is replacing screens on netbooks. And he can now order those screens for $40 direct from factories, and the students know how to reinstall the new screens. And so they've gotten that cost way down as well, which I thought was pretty amazing. But I think we have time for maybe one.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Jim if you could elaborate a little bit more about individualized teacher PD. Oh, sorry.
Tim or Dan?
Dan, sorry. Dan, if you would just go and give us like some examples of like individualized teacher PD that you did at Holland.
Sure. Well, actually, we assign tech coaches to every teacher, 6-12, and then in a session what might happen is teacher might have a goal of doing a certain type of activity in Moodle. That's what they want to do. They want to learn more about Moodle, and maybe it's a certain module in Moodle or whatever, and we'll go down that road. Other teachers would take more broader pedagogical style things where they wanted to change the way they do assessment in their classroom. And then you would talk more broadly about different tools they could use, potential, that kind of thing. And usually what happened in the meeting is you would talk about those goals, talk about some ideas, maybe get into the nuts and bolts, but oftentimes it was more higher level things in that meeting. And then there would be meetings after that that we would touch base on and talk in more detail as they were doing whatever we had talked about. Okay. Does that?
Yeah. And then
it could be a new tool. It could be a new new website they could use.
Would you be doing that training, or did you have like tech staff do that training, or other teachers who used stuff?
Yeah, we had one person at the high school, actually 2 at the high school that are kind of part-time tech, part teacher. They did tech coaching at the high school primarily. I did middle school and upper elementary, and Tim also helped us with tech coaching as well at the high school. So we had a variety of people, but had lots of different roles. They weren't tech coaches full-time.
Okay, thanks.
But all of those people were all former teachers.
Okay.
And I would say that's critical to a tech coach or tech integration person is they got to have the education side with an interest in technology. And they can pick up the technology over time, but they need that education background.
So our time has run out, but I know there's people that still have some questions. We'll stick around for 10 minutes or so. You can come up and ask your question, target the person you want to talk to, and if you have one. Thanks for coming today.
So let people read the story. Okay.